Hello everyone, my name is Ryan Cam and welcome back to the 1999 Project. As the year comes to a close, both with the 99 Project and in real life, oh man, it's not slowing down. I got a lot of movies to cover, so I'm not going to waste too much time. So let's just get into it. Starting off, we're going back to the HBO well one more time to cover Witness Protection.
Dad, I wish they had shot you, because if they had shot you, then you'd be dead and we wouldn't be in this situation.
Witness Protection.
Witness Protection was directed by Michael Pierce and it starred Forest Whitaker, Tom Sizemore, and I'm going to say her name so I get it right, Mary Elizabeth Mastrantonio. I hope I got that right. It tells the story of a man named Bobby Batten, played by Sizemore. He is a bookmaker for the local Boston mob. However, through a series of events, he is pegged for cooking the books, and so he is pretty much he's going to be sleeping with the fishes until he takes himself and his family out of the equation by entering all of them into the witness protection program under the guidance of of an U.S. Marshal played by Forest Whitaker. And the movie chronicles the transition period from out of the life and into another life. HBO has definitively run the gamut this 99 project, going from super forgettable to really seriously in my 20 favorite movies of this year with the Jack Bull. This is not nearly as good as the Jack Bull being Witness Protection, but it's still very good and a very entertaining watch. The movie feels like almost like a one-act play of sorts, and I mean that as a compliment. It takes place primarily in one location. You're with these characters for the entirety of the runtime, this family of sorts, and it feels theatrical in that these people start in one place and then end up in a completely different place. And like I said, not as good as the Jack Bull, not nearly as epic, but a very entertaining watch. Favorite part of the movie was Tom Sizemore. I thought he did a great job. His character goes from, what you would think of a gangster in that era. He's basically like from the Tony Soprano ilk to someone completely different by the end, where just as he goes through this process of slowly transitioning out of the gangster life and into this new life, cracks begin to form and secrets that were once buried have been unearthed. And one of the more riveting parts of the movie was seeing him react to all of these new twists, like having to move to Seattle, not having any work history because technically he's a criminal, and while he's run businesses, he's not really run legitimate businesses. So he basically has to start over literally from scratch. And he's not a young man. He's in his early to mid 40s, give or take. So he basically has to start from the ground up with little to no money because without giving too much away, he has been very irresponsible with his money. Mary, and I'm going to say her name again so I don't get it wrong again. Mary Elizabeth Mastrantonio plays his wife, and she is equally good as well. Really, the strength of this movie really lies in just how kind of bad you feel for the family, because even though technically the patriarch is a criminal, over time, the movie does a good job of showing that yeah, he's trying, but also like he's trying to get past what he left behind and trying to embrace his future. And I think that's something that most people can get behind. Forrest Whitaker is just kind of there as this U.S. Marshal. He was fine and all, but like it's Forrest Whitaker. I mean, like I'm not expecting full Saw Gerrera, but come on, like he's way too restrained for this. That being said, though, your mileage is definitely going to vary on not necessarily slow burns, but like contained movies. Because if you think this is something like The Untouchables, I promise you it's not that. It's very acting driven. There's not a ton of action here. There's one sort of kind of action scene in the beginning, and that's about it. It's very character heavy. It's very acting focused. Your mileage is going to vary, like I said. For me personally, though, I'm going to give this a good rating, but a high good rating. Not as good as the Jack Bull, not as forgettable as something like Lansky. Acting is really solid and makes the movie worth a recommend. But now let's pivot from HBO to USA. Well, USA Network anyway, and their film division when they released Topsy Turvy.
Something inherently disappointing about success.
Topsy Turvy.
Topsy Turvy was directed by Mike Lee and is based on the lives of Gilbert and Sullivan. Now, if those names sound at all familiar to you, if you have ever enjoyed a Broadway musical, most Broadway musicals can be traced back to Gilbert and Sullivan. To make a very long story short, they invented something called an operetta, which is not necessarily an opera, but something different. It's opera's DNA, but more focused on more basically they created what we now know as the musical. Most of the DNA that we find in, like, say, a musical like I'll use Wicked, for example, can be traced back to Gilbert and Sullivan. They were the trunk, the nucleus, if you will. Gilbert and Sullivan are played by Jim Broadbent and Arthur Cordner, respectively, and it chronicles the creation of their most famous work, The Mikado, basically an operetta of feudal Japan. I was aware of Gilbert and Sullivan before going into this movie, so going into this, I was very excited. And the movie is like not going to be in my top 20 of the year, but I still very much enjoyed this one. And it really comes down to the performances and just the general setting. The movie goes full bore when committing to how the movie looks and just focusing on the relationship between Gilbert and Sullivan. I love the look of this movie. I love the 1880s-ness of it all, for lack of a better term. The movie feels like a period piece, and for some that will kind of be a turnoff, but for me personally, I really liked it. And I also loved the performances of everyone involved. Jim Broadbent, Arthur Cordner, Timothy Spall, who would later be in the Harry Potter films as Peter Pettigrew, among many other things. He's great as well. The movie does a great job of getting into the nitty-gritty of the creation of the Mikado. Like, I've said it before and I'll say it again. I love movies about the creations of big things, like McDonald's with the case of the founder, or the Air Jordan in the case of Air. Like, I love movies like that. And so when it was focused on that, it was right up my alley. Doesn't necessarily kill the movie for me, but the biggest thing that I had an issue with was the relationship between Gilbert and Sullivan. The movie kind of dances around the fact that they were creatively at an impasse, but it really doesn't show it all that much. It seems like they're just fine with each other. They have a difference of opinion, but they don't have like this big blowout fight over it. I mean, in a way, I appreciate that, but at the same time, I'm like, are they supposed to be fighting? I don't know. It just seems like there's a lack of conflict here. And then combine that with showing a couple of the Mikado numbers in full. I appreciated the hustle as a big musical theater fan, but at the same time, I'm like, aren't we supposed to be talking about Gilbert and Sullivan at some point? But I am going to give this one a good rating, but a high good rating. I enjoyed this one quite a bit. It's not going to make my full top 20 of the year list, but I still greatly enjoyed this one. The performances are rock solid across the board. The performances of the Mikado numbers were very well done. Seek this one out. But now let's pivot from a musical about Japan to a story about a British woman going to Thailand. It's Anna and the King.
Not the equal of a man child player, the equal of a king.
Anna and the King was directed by Andy Tennant and it starred Jodie Foster and Chow Yun-fat. And this is basically another adaptation of The King and I. A British school teacher is hired on to teach the King of Siam, played by Chow Yun-fat, and his many, many children about the Western world. Here in the 99 Project, I covered The King and I, the animated version of this story. It was weird and bad for a lot of reasons, which I won't get into here. Thankfully, this version is not as bad as that animated version, but it's a very well-made movie that I'll probably never go out of my way to see again. Jodie Foster and Chow Yun-fat are predictably great. Jodie Foster is especially good here. She really does shine like a diamond, especially in the scenes with her and Chow Yun-fat when they're bouncing off of each other, two schools of thought going after each other. I liked that. I like the spirit of that. Also, a bit of a side note, Jodie Foster's son in the movie, excuse me, is played by Tom Felton, Draco Malfoy from the Harry Potter films. I had no idea that Tom Felton had acted before Harry Potter. That was news to me. But he doesn't have much of a role, but he does do a good job with what he is given. Say definitively, if you've seen The King and I, the legendary one from the 50s, or the animated version, you're not really going to miss much here. It's if you know this story, then you're gonna know like what happens here. So it kind of takes the sting out of it a little bit for me personally. It's very well acted, it looks great, but overall, I'm gonna give this movie a good rating just on the strength of the performances alone. Very well made, technically not a problem with it. It just didn't really sing to me, I guess. But now we pivot to one of the weird ones I'm gonna be talking about this week. It's Bicentennial Man.
Bicentennial Man.
Look what I'm doing here. I am trying to make something of myself. I am trying to fulfill my destiny. Does she notice?
Could we talk about this another time?
Bicentennial Man was directed by Chris Columbus, the man who would go on to direct, or had previously directed Home Alone 1 and 2, and would go on to direct Harry Potter 1 and 2. And it starred Robin Williams and Sam Neill. And it is based on the story written by Isaac Asimov. It tells the story of a robot named Andrew, played by Williams, who is uh, who is adopted, I guess, into the home of a wealthy family. And over the course of 200 years, he slowly becomes more and more human. Of all the movies I've covered this week, this one and another one I'll talk about is the one that got a lot of flack from the reviews that I saw. And in certain respects, I can understand why. But in other respects, I just had to scratch my head and say to myself,
Boy, is he strict.
and this movie is not nearly as bad as some people make it out to be, but man, is it weird. And it really comes down to the subject material at play. Robin Williams is predictably good here. Sam Neill is good in the movie as well. Elizabeth DeViets, if I'm pronouncing her name right, she is good in this movie as well, and I'll talk more about her character a little later on. I think what it comes down to for me for this movie is that there's a very interesting story at play here about how a robot slowly over time becomes more human, and in turn, the humans become more like robots, and it's like a switching of the dichotomy. There's something that can be done with that. But I feel like this was done in this case in the most generic mid to late 90s version you could like ever ask for. I love Robin Williams to death. He's a great actor, like very funny man, but he made some very questionable acting choices. Like Francis Ford Coppola's Jack, anyone, and this definitely feels like it belongs in that Jack Patch Adams camp. Like he's trying to be whimsical for the sake of being whimsical. About halfway through this movie, I was just saying to myself, just make a George Bush joke, please. And it also really doesn't help things. There's some pretty disturbing implications with the woman that he eventually marries at the end of the film, who is the great granddaughter of the little girl of the family that he is bought and adopted into. So he marries the great granddaughter of the little girl. It's my brain hurts trying to think about it, but it's not fun if you give it any sort of thought. I'll put it to you all like this. This story of someone unique meeting a human who is unique in their own way, meeting in time only for the romance to be kind of doomed. That story was done way better in a little movie called The Curious Case of Benjamin Button. And I know that Benjamin Button was not a robot in that movie, but that story was done way better in that movie than here. The movie's not as terrible as I've seen some reviews say, but unfortunately, it's pretty forgettable. Like I said, love Robin Williams, very funny man. This one was just kind of there for me. Now let's go from talking about Bicentennial Man to talking about a long-awaited sequel to one of Disney's very first films. It's Fantasia 2000.
Walt Disney Pictures proudly presents Fantasia 2000.
Fantasia 2000 was the sequel to Fantasia, Disney's third ever film released. Like, third overall. It was Snow White, it was Dumbo, and it was Fantasia. Like, Fantasia was number three. Long story short, Fantasia was supposed to be a long-running thing for Disney. Walt Disney himself wanted Fantasia to work. He wanted there to be multiple Fantasias. However, the first Fantasia didn't do super great box office wise, and so that never saw the light of day. However, the first Fantasia did really well on home video, and so Disney CEO Michael Eisner in about the mid 80s said, "Let's make another Fantasia." That started in 84 and this movie came out in 99. So yeah, love Fantasia. It's a top 10 Disney film for me because of how unique it is. Walt Disney said to himself, "Why don't I make a movie where I take classical music and I have my animators make animated shorts over it?" You would never see Disney do something like that today. Like, it just would be impossible. So I just appreciate how Fantasia is just this rare gem of a film that we'll never see again. Fantasia 2000 is not nearly as good as the first Fantasia, but it's very enjoyable, and I am glad that it exists. It really comes down to a couple things why I'm not as high on this one as the first Fantasia. Number one, the celebrities. One of them being Steve Martin, who introduces us to the film. They don't kill the movie for me, the celebrities, but overall, I just felt like they were rather unnecessary. I appreciated how in Fantasia it was just the conductor saying, "This is the song that we're going to be doing this time around. This is what it means, and here's what the animators presented," and just leave it at that. I feel like the celebrity was just window dressing that just didn't need to be there. It also didn't help things, and again, this doesn't kill the movie for me, that a couple of these were remakes, specifically The Sorcerer's Apprentice. I don't know. I just wish they would have done all original work with this one. If the big idea was supposed to be an ever expanding, expounded upon project, like, do original work for that. And remakes are not necessarily a killer for me, but it felt kind of put upon. Nonetheless, though, this movie shines like a diamond in the animation department for the most part. Love the animation here, and just there are several mixes of the animation and the music and the animation that were just gorgeous, and they were just very nicely done. I'm going to give this a good rating, but a high good rating. It's not nearly as good as the first Fantasia, but I'm glad that we got at least two Fantasia movies. Will we get a third? Probably not, and that is a shame. Fantasia was a movie made up of multiple stories with no real theme. However, the next movie I'm going to be talking about is made up of multiple stories with one common theme. It's Paul Thomas Anderson's three-hour epic, Magnolia.
Was that unclear?
Kinda.
God.
Magnolia, like I said, was directed by Paul Thomas Anderson, who had previously directed Boogie Nights and would go on to direct There Will Be Blood, among many others. And it starred, quite frankly, a lot of people. And it tells, well, one story, but, well, multiple people all connected by the idea of chance. Chance and how everything is more connected with each other than you think. That's all you need to know going into this. I'm not going to go super deep into the plot on this one because honestly, you should do what I did, go into this pretty much blind and have your mind blown. I've heard nothing but praise about Magnolia for years, ever since I heard about this. From the very, from the, like, from when I started getting into movies seriously, Magnolia was always something that just kind of intimidated me a little bit. And so I finally have a reason to watch it. And yeah, it's just as good as advertised. The performances in this movie are all pretty much stellar. I mean, PTA pretty much called in all of his favors for this one. Like Philip Seymour Hoffman returns from Hard Eight and Boogie Nights. Julianne Moore, William H. Macy, John C. Reilly, Jason Robards, and then you got Philip Baker Hall, who I was always a fan of his as a character actor, but he is just given a role with just a lot of substance and he crushes it. But easily the guy who steals this movie is Tom Cruise, who plays Frank T.J. Mackey. And, like, honestly, what can I say about this performance that hasn't been said by everyone? It's epic in every sense of the word. This performance is just really, really great. And Tom Cruise won a Golden Globe for this one, rightfully so. I don't know if he was nominated for the Oscar for this. He should have. Should he have won? I'm not sure, but at least I hope he got nominated anyway because he crushes it. Really, and I'm not going super deep on plot on this one for a reason. This movie is so dense and so deep and so complicated that I can't really talk about it in this context unless I do a full deep dive, which will be a super duper long video. Here is what I will say. This movie is epic in every sense of the word. The performances are all just crazy good. Everyone is working at the very top of their game. Paul Thomas Anderson's direction is just pitch perfect. The needle drops are outstanding. Every story beat that you think seems inconsequential just comes together in the most beautiful sense possible. This is getting an amazing grade from me. Magnolia rocks on every single level. See this movie for yourself if you have not. It's one of those movies where I can't properly describe it. You just have to see it to believe it. But now to close things out this week, I have no other way to segue this. Let's go into Stuart Little.
This is the happiest moment of my life. I feel 10 inches tall.
I think I'm gonna cough up a fur ball.
Stuart Little.
Stuart Little was directed by Rob Minkoff, and it had the voice of Michael J. Fox as Stuart Little, as well as Hugh Laurie, Gina Davis, and Joseph Lipnicki, who I swear to God looks like the kid version of John Marr. I can't unsee it, and you can't either. This is based on the legendary book written by E.B. White, and kind of similar to Roald Dahl, it's a book that went hard when it shouldn't have, and this movie follows a similar trend. It tells the story of the Little family, who is played by Hugh Laurie and Gina Davis, and they adopt Stuart, a mouse, into their family. I was trying to rack my brain to try and remember when I had seen this movie last, because I know that I had seen this movie, but I honestly could not remember it. And I'm glad I rewatched it for the sake of this video because this movie is so weird. It's weird in every sense of the word. And this is the other one I talked about with Bicentennial Man, where the reviews of this were just awful, like on Letterboxd. And I was thinking to myself, play the clip again.
Boy, is he strict.
Is this movie bad? No, not in my opinion. But it's just bizarre. First of all, what were they thinking, this family adopting a literal mouse in a home with a cat? Somebody needs to make that make sense to me. Like, first of all, Michael J. Fox does great as Stuart Little. Like, he has a great voice for that. The cat is played by Nathan Lane, and this cat is just completely out of bounds, just all over the place. Hugh Laurie does a good job as well. Gina Davis is good. Jonathan Lipnicki is good as well. Really, honestly, what this movie comes down to is just how bizarre it is. Like, Stuart then gets into a boat race, and like this kid like takes the boat race way too seriously. And just there's like a subplot where the cat enlists like a gangster family of cats to try and like take out Stuart.
Don't want you polluting this beautiful Sussex County air with your language.
I honestly don't know what to rate this, to be perfectly honest. So I'm just not going to rate it. This is unrated. Technically, the movie's fine, but it's so out there and so wild that I can't properly put my finger like on like how to necessarily respond to it. Come to find out, this movie was co-written by M. Night Shyamalan. Now it makes sense. That's all for me. What did you think of any of the movies I've talked about? Let me know in the comments. I would love to read what you have to say. And the final 99 Project episode is going to be a bit of a two-parter because some of the movies released do bleed into the new year. However, I'm going to keep my promise to myself and review every 99 movie that I possibly can within the calendar year of 2024. So it's going to be a bit of a two-parter, but I promise you it's going to be worth it. My name is Ryan Cam, and I'll see you in the next one.